Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get the program started right on time today. We have a lot of ground to cover. I'm Heather Green-Kirk. I'm a tax partner here at Citrin Cooperman, and I am so grateful that you were all able to join us for our 8th annual Driving Your Business Women at the Wheel event. For the past 7 years, our Women's Initiative program has brought Westchester together to share the wisdom that comes from each and every one of our individual stories. There is nothing like the energy you get from a room full of people looking for opportunities to support other people. While the pandemic has forced us to use the Zoom platform to host today's event, we still know that our discussion will be insightful and leave you with a feeling that there is hope for each of us to make a difference. Because we're virtual today, we have colleagues, clients, and friends of Citrin Cooperman joining us from across the US. So welcome everyone. And thank you for sharing part of your day with us. Late last year, Citrin Cooperman expanded our Women's Initiative and we announced the launch of CC Edge, Empowering Diversity and Gender Equality. It's a program committed to continuing and enhancing the firm's tradition of diversity and inclusion. Our panelists today recognize that as the common goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion become widespread, companies are left with figuring out what works for them. Today, they're going to focus on lessons learned along the way and share some current strategies that you can take back to your company to help make a positive impact through awareness and appreciation of our differences. Today's panel includes Chelsea Rosen, newly admitted audit partner at Citrin Cooperman. Chelsea has been moderating Women at the Wheel for several years, so if she looks familiar to you, that may be why. She is an integral part of the Westchester Edge team. Rising up through the ranks, Chelsea uses her strong voice to help support those around her. So welcome, Chelsea, and thank you. Also on our panel today is Marissa Grimes. Marissa has been a longtime champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but she credits her 2 little boys with inspiring her to officially make the career transition into leading D&I efforts at MasterCard. Several years ago, she was invited to write about her personal experience addressing disparities in education for children of color. That piece became a North Star for Marissa to find a way to combine her personal passion with her professional expertise to affect positive change for often marginalized, underrepresented groups. Tanya Hinton will also be joining us today. Tanya is the CEO for DSS Global, an executive search and diversity consulting firm. She has over 20 years of diversity consulting experience in servicing Fortune 200 clients in executive search, talent acquisition, and succession planning strategies. Tanya enjoys being a talent advisor and coach to women, assisting them in achieving their goals for success in climbing the corporate ladder. In her free time, Tanya serves as an executive advisory board member for the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources, a board member for the Mid-America Club, and she works with various entrepreneurial groups that are aligned with diversity. Last but certainly not least, we have Nicole Chiarella. Nicole has been in the public accounting field for almost 20 years and is a tax partner in the New York City office of Citrin Cooperman. She works closely with closely held businesses and owners of those businesses, including high net worth individuals. She is a member of the firm's Tax Mergers and Acquisitions Committee and Cannabis Advisory Services Group. She co-leads the firm's global committee for CC Edge. Outside of work, Nicole loves spending time with her family, playing sports, and spending time outdoors all year round with her husband and 2 children. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea, Marissa, Tanya, and Nicole to get the discussion started. If you have any questions throughout today's event, please feel free to use the Q&A or chat function to send them our way. Chelsea, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Special thanks to Marissa, Tanya, and Nicole for being a part of the panel today. I've already gotten to enjoy speaking with all of you in regards to some of the topics we're going to discuss today. So looking forward to our event and sharing it with everybody else. We are limited to an hour. I want to get right into it. So I'm going to start with our first topic that we've discussed is the difference between unconscious bias and conscious inclusion, and how do we move forward or graduate from awareness into action? Now, Marissa, we've spoke about this and just wanted to get your thoughts on the topic.
Sure, absolutely. So first, well, thank you, first of all, for having me. I was really excited to be a part of this discussion. So unconscious bias and conscious inclusion is a big topic for us at MasterCard. When we talk about inclusion, we really think of it as a leadership skill. It's a skill that helps leaders sort of build and keep diverse teams. So everything that we do is through the lens of building that inclusive leadership muscle throughout the organization, and really just trying to demonstrate what being inclusive looks like in practice, right? So this isn't specific to any particular group. Everyone, all of us have the opportunity to be more inclusive. So we found that by taking this more proactive and more proactive approach, it was really more effective for us than unconscious bias training, for example, which we have done in the past. Because unconscious bias training can often sort of put people on the defensive and it feels more reactive, more passive. But the focus on conscious inclusion, the end goal is really very much the same. It does help to, build that self-awareness around our biases and better understanding of ourselves, which, we all have biases, but it's also a more actionable approach. And it provides really a framework for us to think about how do we model and change behavior throughout the organization. Because the fact is, training doesn't really change behavior. The way that you change behavior is through building habits. So the self-awareness piece is important, but you really do need to be clear on what are the inclusive behaviors that you're trying to embed in your organization and be very intentional about building those. And that is what's going to help people start to adopt those behaviors through that habit building.
So what are some of the first steps a company could take in kind of becoming more actionable versus reactive, as you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's taking that very intentional, being very conscious of when you are including people or excluding people, for example. So I can give you a very specific, very simple, concrete example. So one thing that we did last year that we started was, so when you would go into Outlook and set up a meeting, for example, we worked with our IT department to add an auto-generated message in the invite that said something like, have you invited all perspectives to join this meeting? Because we wanted to build the habit of having people think about, what are the perspectives that might be missing within your team or within your working group as you're working on this project that maybe could help you make more informed decisions or be more innovative or think about a blind spot that you didn't realize you had, specifically, particularly in something like a product development, right? Are you addressing the needs of the audience? Well, if you don't have diverse perspectives represented within that group, you may be missing a key piece of your audience. So that was one concrete way that we tried to help people think more intentionally about making sure that they were being inclusive and including diverse perspectives.
I know, Nicole, you talked about this in developing, CC Edge and trying to consider, all the groups that it's covering and talking about how inclusion is really so vast and that you don't always have all the perspectives to really know the proper targets, say, for this. What were some of the things that you considered when developing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really an ever-changing process. And obviously, CC Edge is truly in the infancy stages. We just launched our mission at the end of 2019. We rolled it out and began forming our global committee in early 2020. And what we found was, as our global committee members were meeting with members of their committees in the individual offices, although we had we knew what we wanted to do, the how was definitely lacking on our end, because my co-lead Laura and myself, while we had tons of experience launching programs and executing events and success skill building programs related to gender equality, what we didn't have and what we weren't experienced in was what to do about race, the lack of race inclusion for various ethnicities and ages and sexual orientation. So just really trying to digest information. And then also pushing a little bit from the top, right? Because we've got to get our leaders to buy in first. And that's the only way it becomes an effective program. So as we met with our CEO and the leaders of the individual offices, we call them office managing partners, about what we needed their role to be, they got excited. They wanted to help. And okay, so what is it we need? And to be frank, we just needed to understand more about our people, our colleagues of different races, of different ages, and what they need, because we can't determine what we need no differently than a man can tell us what a woman needs at the office or from her career.
Right. I think that's what, Marissa's talking about, and you are as well, the diversity of thought, that you have to have these conversations. And Tanya, you've talked about that a little bit in your work of what you've seen about how to address that.
Yeah, so with diversity of thought, one of the things that with some of my clients that they may kind of get stuck with the bias. And for some people, the bias has a negative connotation. So for those people, really kind of working with them on understanding their preferences. Because when you understand your preferences, you're able to think about, okay, I like to promote people that's from a school that I attended or from the same geographic area. But being very much more aware of and intentional about, I know that these are my preferences, but I want to do something different. So I'm going to intentionally open myself up to not just looking for the stereotypes and assuming that, let's say, some women may not be interested in, a more client-facing role, but being more intentional in, asking women what they want, as well as other diverse people. What is it that, you would be able to do if you had the opportunity, being able to be more inclusive with them as far as in succession planning, helping women to, sometimes organizations want them to speak up and tell what they want, but sometimes the women do not feel as comfortable. So that's where, our ERGs or BRGs and just having great mentors in the organization can really help to create an even more inclusive environment.
Yeah, well, I think we've touched on a few times, which I thought was interesting, that, a lot of these topics come up of what can companies do to, evolve these programs and give people opportunities, but it's also being self-aware about, what we can do. And as you're saying, some women maybe have trouble speaking up and saying what they want. And that also has to be something that we have to retrain ourselves to, ask for the promotion or ask for the project, whatever it may be. And that's, I think, something that really has to go hand in hand, not only with the company programs, but company programs being rolled out to help their employees find their voice and find their directions.
Yes, many times I've found that, the companies, they have their agenda and what they think women want, but we also have to be more vocal. And we need to have women mentors as well as men mentors, because I think it really helps to round us out. It helps to have other women encouraging each other. Yes, that was great with what you just did, but also women taking ownership of their careers and being able to get compliments from others on projects that they've completed, being able to say, thank you so much for that compliment, but can you let the person that's overseeing that project or that account, let them know what the value you found in my interaction. That really goes a lot in being able to help develop them as well. And taking more risks, to put your hand up when you feel as though maybe it may be the right circumstance or not, but taking on something that you even feel maybe not as comfortable taking, to just increase your skill set and broaden it and get more visibility.
Yeah, I know, Marissa, you talked about that you are more of a natural introvert, and you kind of had to put yourself to perform to get to your goals.
Mm-hmm.
If you can speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly throughout my career, there have been times where I felt like there were different aspects of my identity, different aspects of, my personality and my lived experiences have had a different impact, various impacts on my career and my career development. And so, you know, definitely being a woman, you know, in a work environment, you know, most of the senior leaders were men. Being a woman of color, a Black woman, where I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me, certainly affected the way that I approached my career and things that I thought that I could do and things that I thought that maybe weren't accessible to me. And then, you know, layering that on top of, you know, being an introvert and just naturally not necessarily seeking the spotlight and not necessarily early on in my career, understanding fully that I needed to build my personal brand and I needed to push myself out of my comfort zone and do things that, you know, I wouldn't naturally gravitate towards. All of those things definitely had an impact on the way that I intentionally sought out different opportunities within my career, because I knew that if I wanted to continue to grow and wanted to be in leadership positions and continue to reach, you know, my personal and professional goals, that I had to build relationships with senior leaders who, you know, I didn't naturally necessarily have something in common with, or maybe we didn't have the same lived experiences, but I knew that I needed to seek that out. And so I think that that's something that we all have to, you know, realize within ourselves and go on that personal journey within ourselves. And I think the more that companies can support people as they're going on those individual journeys and learning more about themselves, learning more about their strengths, their areas where they need to push themselves out of their comfort zones, we make, you know, a better, more innovative, more dynamic and higher performing companies if we, you know, can step in and recognize that there are so many different points of intersectionality within ourselves, within our identities that affect our careers in different ways. And we need to provide the tools and resources and programs and things like that to support all of those various needs.
Yeah, right. And we have to kind of break down some of those perceived barriers that maybe not exist anymore, but come from stereotypes or long bias that we have in ourselves that aren't being even created by our surroundings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's been very interesting. I know, Nicole, you and I spoke about, I think we had 2 separate programs where we went to where they spoke about how, you know, women have adopted a way to apologize for almost any action that you take, right? You know, I open a door and somebody else was reaching for it. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, no one did anything wrong in this interaction, but yet somehow we've trained ourselves, and how that was something that I felt that our firm had put forth to really like help our understanding of that. I don't know the program, if they elaborated further on what you attended.
I know we've had a few different panels and programs on that, and I think it falls under our executive presence division of CC Edge. So we've got a few different divisions that tackle different aspects of that. And yeah, I mean, it's really, you mentioned training ourselves, but it's kind of an untraining, right? And similar to what Marissa was mentioning, we all have this blueprint, right, that we're born with or that we've developed throughout our young childhood about, and that drives how we naturally behave. So I naturally am apologetic when I reach for a doorway. You know, I come from a family of immigrants with a mother that stayed home and a father who worked. And although I have 2 brothers that certainly toughened me up, yeah, my blueprint says this is not my place. And it's an exercise for me, and has been throughout the years, to go, as Tanya mentioned, and ask for that opportunity, create that opportunity for myself. It's not comfortable. I don't know that it ever will be, but it is an ongoing exercise. And I would say I probably got better at it because I had children. And that was what really shifted things for me, where all of a sudden it wasn't just about me asking for myself. It was, no, I need this for my family. And I remember that first negotiation, I was going for a job at another firm. And I said, okay, you know, title is negotiable. Salary is negotiable. Here's what's not negotiable. My schedule, here's my schedule. And they looked at me like, what? Well, how does that work? What if you're not here? You know, what does everyone do? And I just said, honestly, you have a firm of X number of people. If me not being available on this day of the week is a problem, then we have bigger issues than my schedule. And I walked out of the interview thinking, oh, wow, well, that was a fun exercise, but there's no way I got the job. And I did, and I'm here. And so that's pretty cool. But yeah, it was super uncomfortable. So
Yeah, kind of breaking through those barriers that we have put around ourselves. Yeah.
and to Tanya's point, you know, finding mentors, you know, sometimes you learn from those mentors what not to do. And sometimes you learn what you can do. And I think, you know, as we experience these little moments of personal successes or growth, being able to share that with other, you know, generations, not just younger, sometimes it's older as well. Like women that came through the ranks before us didn't experience it the same way, you know, to help one another and just pull each other and encourage each other in any way we can. So I think that's so, so, so important to have a mentor and to be a mentor.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it does go both ways for, you know, say younger staff or people that you are mentoring, but you're right. There's, you know, maybe an older generation that are now learning, you know, how to move forward in this, you know, ever-changing era and how we can be more proactive and inclusive. So it is kind of training everybody. We had a question that came through about giving an example of an experience when you encountered, you know, lack of inclusion and how you move forward to handle it. So I'll kind of open that up to anybody if you can give an example of, you know, what you did or maybe what you did and you now know what you did wrong and how to handle it better. If anybody has any thoughts.
So I would say, you know, I think that I found that a lot of times exclusion isn't always blatant, right? Sometimes it's very subtle. It's sort of those microaggressions that you might experience that maybe are unintentional, where people didn't necessarily realize that they were saying anything wrong, but it made you feel like you didn't belong here, that this wasn't, you know, that you weren't being recognized for the skills and the assets that you bring to the table. You were sort of being disregarded because whatever reason, because you're a woman, because you're a person of color, because you're younger than everyone in the room, because, you know, for a variety of reasons. And I've definitely experienced that in different points throughout my career. I think what I've come to realize is when I've seen other people make comments or say something that maybe was not intentional, they didn't mean to be disrespectful or mean to exclude anyone, you know, I speak up and I say, oh, you know, you just cut Chelsea off, you know, can you let her finish what she was just saying? Or, you know, maybe you should, you know, maybe we should think about rotating who leads this meeting every week rather than having the same person dominate the conversation every time. Let's let other voices, you know, have a say here. And so I think, again, it goes back to that being intentional about being inclusive. For me, you know, there have definitely been times where I have felt like that, for example, I'll give you a very specific example. A couple of years ago, someone made a comment about my hair not being professional or looking as professional as it would as if it were straight. And so of course, now I've started to wear my hair curly most of the time, just because I wanted to normalize that. And it was something that wasn't intentional. I don't think that the person meant to be offensive. But it was just a comment that was made, a little microaggression that made me second guess myself, for example, for a second and feel like, you know, is this the right place for me? Do I belong here? And absolutely, I do belong here. I bring a lot to the table, you know, and it's not based on what my hair looks like. And so I think those are examples where we have to, one, you know, be comfortable, be confident within ourselves about what we're bringing to the table. And then also step in and say, that's not okay, or step in and say, hey, you know, you might want to rethink how you're approaching this situation and think about it and being in a more inclusive way.
Yeah, I think that's really good points. And even, you know, you mentioning about sometimes we don't always have the courage or confidence, people don't, to speak up for themselves, especially in the moment. So it may be taking somebody aside and having that separate discussion of you may want to approach it differently, or setting up the opportunity to say, all right, everybody else is going to start the meeting. So it's not singling anybody out or making anybody uncomfortable, allowing everybody to have the opportunities they may not ask for themselves, right?
Right.
So Tanya, what are some of the things that you've done with working with other companies in, adopting some of these diversity, equality, and inclusion programs? How have you helped them? Especially, I believe you work with, large and small companies. It may feel daunting for small companies to step into this space when they feel like there's, they're not going to have a program that MasterCard has right off the bat. What are some small steps that we can do that are actionable?
I think that, first of all, really taking surveys of what the employees want, all employees, but really paying attention to the demographics and what they're asking for. And then being able to create something that matches those needs. So let's say a smaller organization may not have the funds for even an ERG where they're able to bring in people to speak or for training, but maybe it's seeking out other sources like professional associations, putting them in touch with professional associations, especially diverse professional associations for women, for people of color, for people of various of sexual orientation, that can really help them to feel more comfortable. They may have leadership opportunities. So, partnering with professional associations for training, putting your higher potential people, involving them to where they can maybe start leading a committee, becoming a board member. Those are something that's really important. Also, maybe even finding mentors, even outside of the company, that can be helpful. Looking at your ERGs and BRGs and being able to determine not just from the top down, but from the top down, creating a budget of what is possible, of what we can do for succession planning. So some of the things that we looked at is doing both internal and external succession planning with clients. So looking at who are the women and other people from different backgrounds that we're not really including, that may have not even, raised their hand to say that I'm interested in other opportunities. Letting them know that opportunities exist when they do come up, but also creating developmental opportunities for women. Sometimes my clients have actually had exploratory roles where they will say, you know what, we have even certain positions and we're really not getting women involved with the recruiting process, and we don't know why. Well, some of the reasons is also letting them know that many times women, as well as minorities, have a tendency not to look for opportunities when they feel like they already have a good job. So being able to be more proactive and let people know about these opportunities, spread it by word of mouth as well as posting, but especially with your internal people, let people know that these opportunities exist. Sometimes there's no discussion of it. There's a posting where people have to proactively go onto the website and see these opportunities, but maybe they can just do things such as send an email with opportunities that's available so everyone can see it and let them know that they would like to apply. If you see other people that you feel are qualified that is not applying for the role, encourage them to apply. Those are just a few of the things that we're doing, but I think also with the external succession planning, it's working with clients to be able to say, these are some of the people that you may need to know in your particular function that can add value. Let's start introducing you to women and others that may be outside of the norm of the white male that you may need to know that can bring value, because we also know that senior leaders, when they really need to hire someone, they tend to hire people that they know. And so if you start developing relationships with people that don't look like them early on, when it's time to hire, they're more likely to find someone that may not always fit the norm of what they always selected. So now you're moving from the bias, you've identified the preferences, but now you're changing that behavior to taking for them, it might in the beginning seem like a risk, but it has a much longer reward when they've already started building relationships with people before those opportunities exist.
Right, expanding your network to other people that may not have previously existed, because also your sources, right, could have biases or, not be inclusive, have an inclusion-based population just from the source of where you're getting that network, right?
Yeah, because many times people will go to meetings internally. They sit with the same people. They don't even try to get to know other people that may be part of a larger group. So I say each time you go to a meeting, sit next to someone different, get to know who they are, expand your network. When you attend a conference and you're with your colleagues internally, meet other people, don't just stick together. And then compare your notes. People that you find of interest that you want to continue building a relationship with, make an effort to keep building those relationships.
Yeah. Nicole, with, mentioning that our program for CC Edge is kind of, in the early stages, and, having Tanya here from from working with big corporations, as well as Marissa being at MasterCard, did you look to outside sources to get feedback, or, what's your network in trying to develop this program?
Yeah, actually, one of the first things that Laura, my colleague and I did was we looked at each other and we said, well, we've never done this before, launching a new program, launching a D&I program that the firm had never had. Now, how do we do it? So there was a woman that I knew from years ago who was well known for helping and being an advisor to firms launching DEI, is really familiar with the accounting industry. And so we reached out to her, we hired her as an advisor, and she helped us with everything from that initial communication as we launched it to our partners at our partners meeting, to forming our global committee and creating an agenda, because you're also creating a team, right? So as we created a team, she helped us anticipate the different nuances of a new team and what we could look to do to make sure that communication was effective. And then also clarifying what we wanted the program to be, understanding a timeline and baby steps and what we would do along the way to get there. So that was huge. I did reach out to some former colleagues who were at regional firms. One was at a big four firm. And, it was a little discouraging because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, one of them sits on they have a women's initiative and a DEI. They're two different things. And then another one, they have an entire department that's DEI, that's all these professionals do. So I'm like, oh my goodness, we don't have those types of resources. And we went right to the CEO and we said, okay, here's our budget. It was 3 times what the prior budget had been for the program that existed before. It was approved. And then we just kind of kept nudging along the way. Okay, we know we need an unconscious bias workshop. We really felt that was step 1, so that we could get all of our partners and directors speaking the same language. And then the plan was to roll that out to all the offices from management and below. We had just had him buy in, the CEO, for a 3-hour workshop at our annual partners meeting. And then obviously COVID hit. So we have put on an 1.5-hour long webinar. And that's what it's acceptable for now. It did, initiate the discussions and, set a certain vocabulary that probably didn't exist for some of our colleagues before. And I think that was helpful. But yeah, hearing Tanya and hearing Marissa is so helpful for me because we're so new at this, and I'm just absorbing everything we can to take this and get it off the ground. The other thing I did that was internal, part of me was, and it was my colleague and I did it together, reach out to our executive committee members and our office managing partners who we knew already sort of got it. We have some people that, as Tanya mentioned, will maybe always choose to sit next to those people, regardless of how aware they are of what they're doing. That's their comfortable place to sit and be and meet with people that look like them. And then we have others that want to see change and understand the need for diversity and more creative teams and how that really can impact our bottom line in the future. And so those are the partners we sort of pinpoint and we go after and we say, hey, did you see that, panel of all white males? What's up with that? How was that created? And really, we just kind of go and speak to the leaders in the firm that we know get it. And we feel like that's a good place to start internally.
Yeah, I think, part of, right, the firm leadership that we've talked about and the tone at the top is important, but even some of the things that Tanya spoke about, you know, they seem like small actions that anybody can take, you know, to promote this throughout the firm and your workplace. And, you know, I think those are actionable items that people can really take away from this. We've had a few questions come in and kind of talking about people's fears of, you know, speaking up or joining a women's group or any of these type of programs and being labeled as something, you know, that bias that then you'll get from other people by taking action. And, you know, what are some of I think as we're speaking about this, that, you know, getting a lot more people involved, that will slowly change. You know, what can you say to some of these people about joining these and worrying about the labels that are going to be put on them?
Sure. Well, I would say, you know, first, I mean, there's definitely power in numbers, right? It's hard to be the only and to be the first. So, you know, really want to think about how do you find and create more allies within the organization who can help support you, and you can support each other. You know, for us at MasterCard, we definitely lean a lot on our BRGs. To provide that community for our employees so that they feel like there is a place, a safe space for them to have conversations and to support each other. But we also really push them to get outside of their specific silos and specific communities and collaborate more and to learn from each other and support each other and find the commonalities between the different groups and different communities. Because it is important for us to recognize that there are, you know, lots of unique needs between us and unique challenges that we all face, but we also have more in common than we realize. And so I think, you know, the more that you can tap into others to become an ally and to help support you and help stand up for you, help speak for you when you maybe don't feel comfortable enough to do it yourself, you really have to push out of your comfort zone and find that, you know, opportunity to be brave and to stand up and speak out for what's right. And it's not easy. Like there's no easy answer. There's no easy way to necessarily, you know, move into these spaces that are uncomfortable, especially in the workplace, right? You know, we're still getting to a point where it's like, you know, should we be having these conversations in the workplace? But yes, we absolutely should. You know, they're a necessity. And I recognize that really on all sides, there are people who don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing personal experiences and personal aspects of themselves because they're afraid of, you know, maybe being judged or for someone labeling them or stereotyping them. But then there's also, you know, people who want to be supportive, but are afraid that maybe they'll say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So we really have to create that environment where people feel comfortable being vulnerable and feel comfortable that they won't be judged and they won't be ridiculed and they won't be, you know, looked upon as not respecting their full authentic selves in the workplace.
Yeah, I think we talked about that earlier in some of our discussions about, you know, in learning about these programs and what are the right actions to do, that we don't have all the right questions. And sometimes in asking those questions can feel, you know, scary to somebody because they don't want to hurt anybody or, you know, say or do the wrong thing, even though the intent is to have a positive purpose and a positive outcome. You know, I think that's something that, as you're speaking about having a safe space, right? You want to have that space for both parties, you know, somebody to be open and honest of what their needs are, and then someone to feel open to say, I want to support you. How can I do that? And in what way? You know, it goes both ways. So we all have to find a way to have that vulnerability, as you said.
And Chelsea, I wanted
Go
to
ahead.
comment on what you were saying about being involved in some of the women's groups or just the business resource groups or employee resource groups that are designated for women, for Black, for Latino, for Asian, for LGBTQ. I think these are really important in organizations because they provide a safe place for people to be more vulnerable. And for also for others within the organization, if they have more interest in learning more about these groups, they can attend also. And they can also learn different ways of interacting with people from groups that are unlike themselves. So it's a learning for, you know, the people that are participating. Sometimes they may not want to participate because you had mentioned, you know, they may have apprehension about being involved in these groups, but really it's to provide a safe space. Sometimes people may feel like, well, I don't really need help, or I don't want to be seen as being weak because I'm involved in these different groups, or now I become labeled. We don't want people to become labeled. We want to be able to provide the necessary resources regardless of the level that a person is within the organization. Some of the more junior to mid-level people may feel more comfortable with it. Some of the more senior people may not. But it's also an opportunity for them to help shape the program, to be able to provide input as to what are some of the soft skills that's really needed to move up in our organization. And what is it that we're seeing that's lacking? Let's say, for instance, women. You know, is it that we're finding that women are not speaking up enough? Are we finding that women are not raising their hand to take on more challenging roles? If we're seeing that consistently within the organization, then maybe we need to discuss that in the group and develop and have some tools and strategies for them to overcome some of that. It may be even speaking about their accomplishments in third person. Sometimes women may have a difficult time advocating for themselves, so it's much easier to be able to get them to say things of what maybe their boss may have said about them, or, you know, what others on a project have said about them. So those are just some of the tools, but I think that being involved with these groups, people need to dispel any type of stereotypes that people need help, or that, you know, they've outgrown these groups. I think it's good for people of all levels, and especially being able to dispel some of the stereotypes, such as, you know, women that are really career oriented are aggressive. We don't have to accept aggression, but we can say that I don't accept the aggressive, but I am assertive.
Mhm.
Those are just, you know, a small tool, and I think has really helped all of us in being able to get to where we are.
I think with the strong voices, as Marissa mentioned, you know, thinking about how we've moved through this pandemic, and how I think for a lot of people prior to this, you know, flex schedules, Nicole, as you mentioned, you know, were something that people were intimidated by to ask for, because what that meant to their dedication to their career. And, you know, did that mean your focus lied elsewhere? And I think now everybody's seeing how the pandemic has shifted everybody working from home. We can already see how that's going to be different coming back to a, you know, pre-COVID workplace, how that's going to be a lot much more acceptable. So to think about how the things that we have on our horizon, the more voices we get, how easily that transition may change, or that conversation may change. One question that we had come across was in regards to how the pandemic will affect women's careers, you know, in this new environment. I don't know if anybody has a comment in their thoughts about it. Nicole, I know you've mentioned like your networking has changed from being at home than it was previously.
I mean, that was certainly a positive aspect for me. And I think some women who do enjoy networking will find, probably, and men, that if they're working parents or they're working, they have other interests, that it's a little easier now, right? We don't have to travel to and from networking events. But I think overall, you know, there was a recent article that I'm happy to share afterwards that I read that, you know, it was about, you know, on a daily basis, it was about working parents. When you have two working parents, if there's a conflict, you know, that almost the majority of the time, it will be the mother that ends up taking the child handling the remote learning, taking them to the doctor's appointment, even if it's two professionals. It was really interesting. It was a male banker actually that sent it to me. He's like, this is unbelievable, because he's experiencing that in his own home. He's like, I'm seeing it firsthand. My wife's a working professional as well. So I think that's somewhat unfortunate, but it's also that we need to advocate for ourselves in our own homes, right? So, so often we as women, we want it done a certain way, and this is the right way. This is the way you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? And if we really want that help from our partner at home, and we need that so that we can be on an equal playing ground at home and then also in the office, we need to be able to say, okay, so there's too much peanut butter with, the kids will eat it. It'll be fine, right? It's good enough. It's okay. And it doesn't have to be done our way, when we have that partner at home. But, if we need that help and support, we've got to be willing to accept it, understand we need it so that we can be, we can go to the office and virtual office and work and be present there as well. I see another question come in, Chelsea. I don't know if you want me to address that says.
That was addressed to you?
It was, yeah, I'm getting it from different angles. So I'm like, okay, maybe I just need to stop and address that. It says, for Nicole, you mentioned you started from the beginning. Did you get any resistance from people who were somewhat doing this in the firm? Oh, and it disappeared. Hold on. Heather, where's Heather? She made it disappear. Let's see if I can find it again. Okay. Did you get resistance from people who were somewhat doing this in the firm? Do they take some kind of pride and don't want to accept the help they need from the outside? So yeah, the woman that was running our women's initiative previously was just very overwhelmed with other responsibilities. And so the first thing that my colleague Laura and I did was we actually went and sat down with her. She's been in the industry much longer than me, has more experience, has been running a women's initiative. So we went to her, spoke with her about the challenges, and got her guidance as far as who was already involved and how we could build out another program. I think when we met, we didn't have really as much of a vision for what we expected, and we hadn't developed the CC Edge mission yet, but she was our first move. So I can't say she wasn't willing to get outside help. But I will say, I think the biggest concern, and we got this mostly from the global committee members that we'd identified with her, was that they were just concerned that the Women's Initiative wouldn't exist. They're like, wait a minute, the Women's Initiative is going away? Are we not going to have this? What does that mean for women at the wheel? What does that mean for example, other programs we've had for years that have been successful? And, it took some time and some convincing, like, no, all that's great. It's been a success. We're not going to stop doing anything. We will have certain events and programs that are just for women, that are just for certain minority groups, or just for certain ages. In a perfect world, we'd be doing all of that and operating on all cylinders. Again, we're in year one still, so we're working on how to develop them. But it's interesting because we started out asking men to join that had not been involved previously with the Women's Initiative, and to Tanya's point, they were kind of like, whoa, I don't know if I want to be associated with that CC Edge thing. And then once they joined, and they, we explained to them their specific value that we felt they'd bring. We've had, since that time, other males join willingly without us, stalking them and seeking them out. They've joined and they said, I want to be a part of this, and here's what I think I can bring to the table. And one of the males is really leading our newsletters and our outward communication, like firm-wide and externally. So it's been awesome. So to answer the question.
I had a question come in from Marissa about what types of D&I organizations are available for smaller companies to partner with in order to become more diverse, or utilize this for maybe a smaller company.
Yeah, so I think for smaller companies, and Tanya, you can probably jump in here because you work a lot with smaller companies. But I think for me, when I think about smaller companies, especially when you're just sort of starting out, one of the things that I feel like you really have an advantage around is because you can start to build D&I into your foundation from the start, right? A large company like MasterCard, where we've been around for more than 50 years, we have all these processes and systems that are in place that weren't really built with D&I in mind. We have to do all this work to now dismantle a lot of those systems and rebuild them so that they are more inclusive. But a smaller company, you don't necessarily have that issue. So I think, as you're thinking about, first, you really have to think about what you want to solve for, right? So is it bringing more diverse talent into the organization? Where are you focused? Is it, bringing more junior talent and recruiting from colleges, for example, to bring more junior talent into the organization that you can grow through the pipeline? Is it bringing more senior talent in at the top of the organization so that people see that there are senior leaders that are diverse within your organization, and that will help to attract more diverse talent at other levels? I think first you have to determine where it is that you want to start and where you want to focus your efforts. And then, start to think about what are the partners that can help you do that. So for example, it could be starting with creating a small mentorship program that maybe you pilot with a local university, and maybe you mentor some college students to help them get prepared to enter the workforce. And you build that relationship, and then you start to build that pipeline of talent into your organization. Or it could be maybe you seek out an organization that can help you develop and pilot a development program, right? So for example, if you want to pilot something for, say, 25 women within your organization who are high performing talent, you can create something that is relatively low cost that you can just test out to see how that works. So even at MasterCard, at a large company, a lot of what we do is piloting and testing and learning, right? To understand really what's working, what's not working. We measure along the way to figure out how effective we're being, and then we reassess, and we go from there to adjust our strategy as needed. So I think, it's the same is true for a smaller company. Think about how you pilot small things and test and learn, and then grow from there.
So for someone, we're talking about our program and our firm, but what are some of the biggest hurdles that, Tanya, Marissa, that you guys have foreseen when implementing these new programs? Marissa, you talk about pilots and things that have worked and haven't. What are some of the missteps that people can avoid when starting their programs?
Yeah, I think one is you really want to understand, again, what are the needs of your organization? A lot of our focus at MasterCard tends to be on understanding the data and what the data tells us, because perception doesn't always match up with reality in your company. It may feel like you have an issue in one particular area, but really that may be just a symptom of a larger problem that you need to address. So, so definitely understanding, what data you have in your company. So it could be workforce data like representation and, who you're hiring, and retention. So if you're losing, a lot of your workforce to other opportunities, understanding why that might be. Employee engagement surveys are super important. We've done focus groups to understand what different employees' pain points are, and how we can address those. So I think first you really have to understand what it is you're solving for, because otherwise it's sort of like you're shooting in the dark with strategies that may ultimately not be impactful and not really address the issues that exist within the company. So I think it's avoiding missteps means doing the work at the beginning to make sure you're very clear on your objectives and what you're trying to solve for, and then you figure out how you can best address those going forward.
Yeah, Tanya, you've talked about that as like understanding the culture within the company.
Yes, and I think that sometimes some of the missteps is only creating things when there's a crisis. And so it's being proactive and being able to do the right things. So one of the things they were talking, the question was asked about smaller organizations. So let's say if you're a professional organization and you're making professional hires, you may want to know about the Black MBA Association, the Hispanic, formerly the Hispanic MBA Association, which is Prospanica, to increase your hiring of Black and Hispanic talent. Your Asian MBA. You may want to know about REACH, which is your LGBTQ community. So that way you can start building relationships with those types of organizations, or your Latino professionals in finance and accounting. are just some of the organizations or network of professional women or women in technology. Those are some of the organizations you can start building relationships with, but also formalizing onboarding and training so that people can actually start off on the same level and move up in the organization, and implementing strategies not just from top down, but also bottom up.
Well, we have a few minutes left. I didn't know if you guys wanted to give some parting thoughts on what you think would be the easiest actionable item for people to take away, after this discussion that they can do themselves. We'll start with Marissa.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, first, I think we all have the ability to sort of start within ourselves, right? I mean, ideally, you would have, that top-down approach where your leadership, commits to making D&I a priority and putting the resources and investment into building out a program. But of course, not every organization has that ability to start from that point. So you really, I think, can look within, each of us can look within ourselves to think about how we can be more inclusive. What type of leader do we want to be? What type of leaders do we want to have within our organization? And then sort of just do the work to understand how you can be more self-aware, how you can understand your own biases, your own blind spots, and then think about how you can more intentionally be more inclusive. So, identifying what perspectives might be missing on your team and thinking about how do you grow your network to bring in more perspectives, more diverse perspectives into your organization. How can you speak up and speak out when you see non-inclusive behavior happening? How can you mentor someone who doesn't look like you to, provide a source of support for them, but also, expose yourself to someone else's lived experience will help to, better your self-awareness in your development. So I think, think about some concrete actions that you can take, and sort of committing to, taking an action maybe once a week. Again, going back to that idea of habit building, what's one thing that you can do every week to build that habit of being more inclusive, I think is a great way to start.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you all for being a part of our panel today, and thank all the participants who contributed to our discussion with their questions and involvement in our discussion. I know this is a little different than our normal event where we get to see everybody and, speak with everybody one-on-one. So want to thank everybody for participating. Marissa, Nicole, Tanya, really appreciate all your thoughts and comments, and, hope to continue the discussion other times in our network so that we can expand on this. So thank you all, and thank you all for joining, and have a great day.